Hi everyone. So I'm going to give you hopefully a brief lecture on the Natural Selection and Evolution Unit 7. We're not going to actually go into this unit at depth at all. Um, and I'm not going to test you a lot on this unit either because of the fact that AP exam modifications have eliminated this unit and Unit 8, which is ecology. But I do think that a lot of the questions that you guys are going to be asked will have a tie to natural selection or will have a tie to evolution. So these are pretty basic things, so I think that it's just good to go through them really fast. So what is evolution? You can have microevolution or macroevolution. Microevolution are going to be small allele changes within a single group, okay, and a small amount of time is needed. So this is in a very small scale and small time frame. Macroevolution are much larger changes of a group or groups that can result in speciation. So macroevolution is actually how evolution leads to new species. It takes a whole bunch of time and there has to be an accumulation of these microevolutionary changes. So microevolution eventually, given enough time, will lead to macroevolution. So how did evolution, the theory of natural selection and everything, be developed? So we know Charles Darwin. He went on a voyage in the HMS Beagle, and it was more than anything a biogeographical voyage. It was a study of a whole bunch of different biogeographic regions with a whole bunch of different species to try to observe different trends. So this is kind of where he went. Okay, he started from Europe, went to South America, went to Galapagos, went to Australia, okay, went back to Europe. So what was his, after he actually took everything, took all of his observations back to Europe, what did he come up with? He saw that in Galapagos, the finches of Galapagos, which are these birds, resembled mainland finches, but there were more types. So there was a resemblance to the mainland Ecuadorian finches, but there were many, many more types of finches and much more variability. Birds varied in nesting size, beak size, and food. What was his proposal? Each bird was descended from the mainland species, so it had a common descent, but it was a common descent with variation. Okay? Essence of Darwin's theory, you need to have variation among individuals. That's what he saw. So if you have a common ancestor, you come from a common descent, what changes in you or what changes in the species is the variation from that common descent. He also thought about the overproduction of offspring. So more offspring than the environment can support, creating competition. So in order for there to be this, he didn't actually come up with the word natural selection, but in order for there to be a selection of the variability that is already present, then there has to be some sort of competition. So he came up with the idea that there was an overproduction of offspring. And this is true for many, 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 many organisms that can produce thousands is a bit excessive, but hundreds of offspring, and only a few of them will survive past adult age to reproduce themselves. This idea of the survival was called fitness. So most favorable traits for survival, able to reproduce more, passing down these favorable traits. So successful traits will equal adaptations. So this fitness is simply a favorable trait that allows an organism to survive past reproduction and past his or her own successful traits towards other generations, creating adaptation. Okay. Where does all of this variation come from? All of these different traits, they can come from mutations. We know what those are, or they can come from sexual reproduction, which is just the recombination when there is meiosis, when there's fertilization, and things like that. So you can see here so much genetic variation in so many organisms. So once you've got this genetic variation, what can you do with this variation? There can be a selection. Okay, so evolution by natural selection means that as the environment fluctuates or as environmental factors change, these environmental factors can act on phenotypes, can act on traits. Okay, and what does that mean? because some traits are best for a particular environment, they're going to be selected. And when they're selected, the organisms with those traits will survive and will reproduce more than others. So this idea of selection or of this fitness, this beneficial traits that allow an organism to survive past reproduction and reproduce more is called survival of the fittest. This does not mean strength. So that's also super, super important. And another thing that's important is that this is not random, right? Because there is a selection towards specific traits, it is not a random action. It's not chance. Because chance is something else, and we're going to talk about genetic drift, which is also important, so we don't want to confuse those. Okay, so what individuals actually differ in? They obviously differ in their genetic variations, and what that genetic variation, when it comes to how it interacts with the environment, that is fitness. Okay, so fitness measures an organism's reproductive success based on the traits that organism has. It does not necessarily mean stronger. There might be just different phenotypes that allow an organism to survive better. For example, this mouse over here versus this mouse over here. The one that is able to blend better with its environment will probably not get eaten by a predator and will probably be able to reproduce more. Okay, so it does not mean stronger. It simply means being able to survive past reproduction and past your own traits. What are the types of selections that influence an organism? So, and again, not necessarily an organism, but a population. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a second. All of these types of selection, what it is doing is an organism either lives or dies, but what it really influences is the population, the entire genetic pool of that population. And hopefully I can define that in a second about what genetic pool is, but it's just the accumulation, all of the genomes of all of the organisms of that population, and the frequency of different types of alleles will affect the genetic pool. So let's say that you are undergoing something that's called that the population is undergoing something that's called directional selection. So what you can see, this would be an example, for example, giraffe neck size or horse's sizes. Okay, so before selection, there can be a variety of different sizes of the giraffe neck or the horse. Okay, but if having a larger neck or being a larger horse is beneficial for your reproductive success, then the traits that will be selected for will be larger size or larger neck. So slowly, through generations, through time, more horses that are larger or more giraffes that have larger necks will be selected for, and eventually the entire population will move towards having a higher frequency of larger horses or longer necks in giraffes. So this is directional because it really is selecting for a trait that is the extreme. It's not selecting for a trait that's right in the middle. It's selecting for a trait that's the extreme. Being larger would be a trait that is not average, but an extreme trait. And as time goes by, you select larger and larger and larger horses, eventually leading to a population that has a different phenotype. It's much larger, right? Stabilizing selection is a little bit different, where the selection actually favors the organisms right in the middle, right when they're average. So this can be, for example, in something like human birth weight. Okay, so if the child that is born is very small or the child that is born is very large, usually those children can suffer from mortality. Okay, so that means that those children that have extreme sizes, either very small or very large at birth, are not going to be favored for. Those traits are not going to be favored for. So the intermediate trait, the average trait of birth size, is going to be the trait that's favored for. And with time and generations, eventually the vast majority of human beings that are going to be born will fall within this average size because it's the size that is favored for based on environmental conditions. Okay. You can also have disruptive selection when it's not just one extreme that is favored for, like for example here being super large as a horse, but it can be two extremes. Okay, so this can be, for example, something that are called rocket pocket mice. So they can have different colored furs. They can be very light or they can be very dark. And depending on their environment, it is suitable for them to be light or dark. It's not suitable for them to be in the middle. Why? Because in their environment, they can have very light rocks or they can have very dark rocks. So what that does is that some organisms that choose to camouflage in the dark rocks will be favored for because they will avoid predation. Some organisms that choose to camouflage in the light rocks will be favored for because they will avoid predations. The middle ones that don't actually camouflage with anything will immediately die, right? Because they can't avoid predation. So what that eventually does is this little what would this be? Hump? This little hump over here where these organisms are dying off, right? So what's being favored are the traits of both extremes. So this disruptive selection usually leads to speciation. So it usually leads to this or these set of organisms that have been favored for being very dark actually become reproductively isolated and just mate with each other and eventually may become a different species than these light organisms. Okay. An example of natural selection can be, for example, this moth, this peppered moth. And what's super interesting about that is that we have a very strong role in natural selection more than anything because we can change our environment. So these would be, for example, the barks, the tree barks before the Industrial Revolution, and this could be the tree barks right after. So because of the smog and everything, the tree barks could become darker. And what that does is that if there was a peppered moth here that was a bit light, it was perfect for that pepper moth because it could camouflage with its bark. But the minute that the barks became darker, what began to be favored? A darker color in the peppered moths. So the pepper moths undergo natural selection for the trait of darker color because that's the trait that increases fitness, and overall the population will start changing its genetic pool towards having a higher frequency of dark moths. Okay. Evolution can also be seen with pesticides and bacteria and things like that, and bacteria with drugs and pesticides with parasites. So what can happen is that as we are trying to eliminate, let's say a bacteria right over here, we're trying to eliminate a bacteria with a specific antibiotic, a drug. If one or a couple of the bacteria in that population have resistance towards that drug, what's going to happen is that natural selection is simply going to favor the bacteria that have the resistance, and eventually those bacteria are going to reproduce much, much, much more, and to the new colony of bacteria that are infecting you are now resistant to that drug or to that antibiotic. So that's how resistance comes to play. If this is the case all the time, let's say that the best allele for a particular situation, let's say in the horses, it would be to be as large as you possibly can be. What would make it so that still small horses are born? What maintains genetic variability if natural selection is always favoring a particular condition? What's important is that to know that a lot of the times when you have a particular allele, let's say a recessive allele that is not necessarily very good for you, the heterozygote that contains the dominant allele that is good for you and that is favored, and the recessive allele that's not necessarily good for you when it comes as a homozygote could actually be favored. Okay, so this is called something that's called heterozygote advantage. And what's important about this is that we have a particular case that has to do with heterozygote advantage, and this is sickle cell anemia, and you guys probably already know a little bit about this because it was in your mutation packet. So theoretically, to have sickle cell anemia is actually something extremely dangerous and very mortal. But you only have sickle cell anemia when you have 2 copies of the recessive allele. So if natural selection only favors people that do not have sickle cell anemia, only people that have the dominant allele that do not have an abnormal hemoglobin molecule, then theoretically, sickle cell anemia allele, which is the recessive allele, should be eliminated from the population through time, right? Why is it not eliminated? Well, it's not eliminated because the heterozygote, the organism that contains both the dominant allele and the sickle cell recessive allele, actually has some type of natural selection, some type of favoring as well. And this has to do with areas that have a lot of malaria. Okay, so although it is not necessarily good to have the recessive sickle cell allele when it comes to having the disease, if you contract malaria, to be a heterozygote is super beneficial because malaria, the parasite of malaria, is not able to actually attack a person that has a lot of these defective hemoglobin molecules. So this heterozygote is actually favored for, and because this heterozygote is favored for, this recessive allele of sickle cell is not eliminated from the population. So that's how we also maintain genetic variability. We can also talk about artificial selection. This is pretty much what we've done with cats, dogs, farm animals, and a bunch of crops. Okay, so we select for particular traits that we want. In this case, for example, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, leaves, all of this, kale, sorry, all of these different now thought about vegetables actually came from the one original wild mustard. Okay, so what we did is we simply favored different traits and reproduced these favored traits over and over and over again so that we could produce new types of organisms that have the traits that we favor. Okay, so this is just one way that we impact selection. We do a lot of inbreeding a lot, and when there's a lot of inbreeding, for example, when you want a specific, and this is something you should not be doing, is buying, for example, dogs that have been inbred a lot so that they can maintain their race. What happens is that you are decreasing the genetic variability within that species a whole bunch, and when you decrease genetic variability, you lead to a lot of genetic problems. So a lot of those dogs have a bunch of genetic problems because of the fact that they've been inbred and their population, their species has very little genetic variability. You can also produce like superbugs or super bacteria or super plagues because of the use of antibiotics and insecticides, creating resistance. So that's also super important. And what's super, super, super important is to understand that populations are the ones that are evolving. Individuals do not evolve. So organisms, what they simply do is that they're selected for or they're selected against. So they either live or die. Okay, if they do live, they can reproduce. And if they reproduce, they pass their traits on to the next generation. Eventually, the accumulation of these new traits or of these favored traits leads the entire population towards evolution. So the populations are the ones that are evolving. Organisms do not evolve. Okay, they do not have the ability to evolve. Okay, and the last thing that I do want to talk about is the fact that evolution does not only have to happen through a natural selection. Natural selection, remember, is not random. Okay, it has a direction. It favors something. It favors the beneficial trait. There is evolution, or there is changes in different traits in a population just based on random processes, based on chance alone, and this is called genetic drift. Okay, so chance events can change the frequency of traits in a population. Let's say here, okay, there's a yellow bird, there's a red bird, and they're 50-50, right? 50%, 50%. But by chance alone, it was the red bird that migrated into a new environment. So the new environment that is colonized by this red bird is only going to have the red bird's alleles. So in this case, this red allele was favored not because it was beneficial to the environment. It was simply fixed, or it was simply increased in the population simply based on chance, just because that bird was the one that migrated. It could have been the yellow bird. Okay, so this is super strong and it's super influential when there's something called founder effects or bottlenecks. Founder effects is what I just told you, where a small group splinters or jumps off and starts a new colony. It is random who actually starts the colony. It's not like the best bird is going to go off and start the colony. It could be any bird. So again, there's no natural selection there. It's genetic drift that, and usually because it's a small population, let's say that it was just this bird or maybe two birds, you're going to decrease in genetic variability just because of the fact that now you have less species. Okay, so genetic drift will decrease this genetic variance in this population because the population has been started by a few colonists. And you can see this also in different countries where the population started with a few amount of people or in a very small population. They do not tend to have a lot of genetic variability. They tend to have very little genetic variability because basically all of them came from a few amount of people. Okay, you can also have bottlenecks. It is very similar to founder effect. It's not that there's a new population being created. The original population gets struck by, for example, a catastrophe or something, and the original population decreases in a whole bunch of individuals. So now the original population is very, very small. And since you killed off a whole bunch of those organisms and you have only a limited amount of organisms, you have also decreased genetic variability. Just one extra thing, this would be, for example, the cheetahs. Cheetahs have unfortunately undergone two different bottlenecks, two different drastic decrease in their populations. One was during the Ice Age, and in the last 100 years, it's been us creating a loss of habitat and poaching, which is illegal hunting of these animals. So all cheetahs share a small number of alleles, less than 1% diversity. So they're super, super, super similar genetically because of the fact that they've lost so many individuals that had so many potential mutations and potential genetic variability. So that's where I'm going to leave this off. I'm also going to give you guys some videos to watch for yourselves, and hopefully that was helpful. Thank you.